to the greatest American Civil War film, and where there have been a fair number since the early 1900s. Some may anoint an older classic like 1939's Gone with the Wind, set in Atlanta, Georgia, and during the Atlanta campaign, or to 1951's The Red Badge of Courage, starring arguably the most decorated American World War II veteran, Audie Murphy. Perhaps it's one of the Clint Eastwood Western classics, such as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of 1966.
General Sibley, he looks dead. He's finally getting out of our hair. Hooray for Dixie! Hooray! Hooray for Dixie!
Or the Outlaw Josie Wales of 1976, respectively.
Coming with us, Josie?
I recognize Fletcher.
More recent, you have 1989's Glory, and the political drama that is 2012's Lincoln, starring the masterful Daniel Day-Lewis.
Shall we stop this bleeding?
So, what of Ronald F. Maxwell's 1993 war epic titled Gettysburg, and based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel The Killer Angels, written by Michael Shara? Well, if being objective, I cannot proclaim it necessarily the best. With that said, it is my personal favourite, and a film where I can repeatedly binge-watch, always finding something unique and new to appreciate, otherwise missed upon prior viewings. This is a truly fantastic film, and if to argue in its favour that it belongs within this discussion of the very best, one can look to the depiction of its historical protagonists, to the concise and controlled weaving of multiple narratives, and in the authenticity to its source material. To begin with, how often does one receive a cinematic offering that seeks to depict historic military figures of higher command within this given setting? The answer is very few, including, generally, and no pun intended, across the expanse of military dramas. Frequently, and often to great effect, there's the storytelling of a company or a regiment.
Lieutenant Sobel does not hate easy company, Private Random. He just hates you.
Thank you, sir.
But seldom is there a cinematic character study for a prominent historical military commander, let alone multiple generals within a given conflict, and that can deliver a mostly satisfying output faithful to those who are its subject. To this point, with the movie and novel alike, the principal focus resides with the two controversial Confederate figures that would lead the Army of Northern Virginia through those momentous 3 days. Considering the volume of historians, enthusiasts, and reenactors, to satisfy the audience with strong portrayals of those idolized or reviled required some delicacy, tactfulness, and respect for the factual. While there are elements for one to be critical, including the silly beards, the casting remains solid with many strong performances. For the South, and aside from the Union General and future President Ulysses S. Grant, we have arguably the most notable and prominent military commander of this entire conflict in Robert E. Lee, played by Martin Sheen. This distinguished actor
We move on the word of an actor.
Brings a unique gravitas in his portrayal. You see, and I can already hear some groaning, but the Lost Cause mythology personified Lee into something superhuman, of a perfect Southern soldier and gentleman. However, the movie removes, along with the novel, much of the gloss and the glamour.
Since I no longer hold the general...
I have told you there is no time for that. There is no time.
This is a good thing, presenting a more human and realistic account of the general.
I'm so very tired.
Through Sheen's performance and to this point of the conflict, he presents the general as a relatively decisive figure from the outset, although becoming more wary as the errors and the losses mount, of questionable health enduring yet another grueling campaign, possessing a semblance of self-doubt despite the perceived invulnerability and high morale of his army.
It's my fault. I thought that we were invincible.
There's also this fatalistic determinism that often characterizes many interpretations of this general, to his grand strategy with achieving a decisive victory on northern soil.
In the center, they will break.
Sir?
There's a lot to be said with Lee's grand tactics, but where the movie's interest resides is in the relationship and power dynamic between Lee and his most trusted corps commander and dear friend. Of course, I refer to James Longstreet. While one can heap praise on Sheen and Daniels for their portrayals of Lee and Chamberlain respectively, for me it is Tom Berenger who steals the show. Pete, or Lee's old warhorse, might be the most controversial figure with respect to this specific engagement. To preface, and with Lee, there's There's no justifiable excuse nor valid scapegoat for the horrific and costly decision that would be Pickett's charge on that fateful third day.
General Lee, I have no division.
But with Longstreet and in command of 1st Corps there at Gettysburg, it wasn't his finest moment either. Still, the movie and the novel did much to unravel the unfair appraisal of this talented commander, where many would blame him primarily for this significant defeat. Without delving too much into the history, simply put, the Lost Cause narrative would condemn and scapegoat James Longstreet for his joining post-war the Republican Party, and in assistance of his old friend General Grant, and to his personal criticisms of Lee militarily thereafter. Through Berenger's performance, the actor successfully captures the brooding, glum, even stubborn James Longstreet. Some of the movie's more enjoyable moments would also come from him conversing with his close friend and division commander, the flamboyant General George E. Pickett, played by Stephen Lang.
No photographs.
Good Lord, George, what does that smell?
That's neat. Ain't it lovely? Woo.
To his exchanges with those other generals of Pickett's division, including the astute political General James L. Kemper.
Speaker of the House of Virginia, Colonel. Matter of fact, Colonel, I'd like to talk to you about some political matters, if I might.
The resolved to claim redemption for the defeat at Kernstown with Jackson, General Richard B. Garnett.
Let it go, Dick. Let it go. I consider it a damn fine piece of luck to have a man of your caliber attached to this command. I do.
And of course, the reflective Louis A. Armstead, portrayed by the late Richard Jordan.
Have you heard any news of old Winfield? Old Winnie boy?
One can also not forget the honorary member, as a fish out of water supporting player who acts as the recipient of comic relief hijinks. That is Lieutenant Colonel Sir Arthur Fremantle of the British Army. As to the Union side of the ledger, and showcasing a juxtaposing view with regimental command, we have Jeff Daniels as Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain of the 20th Maine. Through the exploits of this regiment and in its critical role with preventing the flanking manoeuvre exercised by the 15th and the 47th Alabama regiments against its position at Little Round Top, we see the bravery on display, experience of the camaraderie, and witness the firm resolve of its leader under fire. Daniels portrays Chamberlain as this composed, calm, and decisive individual with strong convictions to the gravity of his situation and responsibility.
Gentlemen, I think if we lose this fight, we lose the war.
With his brother Thomas Chamberlain, there's a welcome counterweight in personalities through his lighter-hearted, energetic, and youthful exchanges.
This here brigade got a special call. You'll hear that call. You know the next one's for you. Goes like this. Ta 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 ta.
Then there's a fan favourite in the author insert, that is Buster Kilrain, the Irish sergeant and veteran soldier who adopts a mentoring and fatherly role for the two younger men.
I tell you, sir, it's not easy handling these new recruits when the officers act like they ain't got any sense.
As with the novel and in the film's earlier moments, the great character actor Sam Elliott also appears as the famous cavalryman John Buford Jr.,
Can deprive the enemy of the high ground.
who would quickly react in delaying the approaching division under General Henry Heath of Ambrose P. Hill's 3rd Corps. It is a solid cast, to be sure, but would amount to little if the narrative and plotting were to devolve into a tangled mess. Unlike Gods and Generals that meandered between far too many engagements, straight into the politics, even down the rabbit hole of Lost Cause mythology, Gettysburg maintains its focus, covering key events that would unfold chronologically over these 3 days. We first begin with General Buford recognizing the potential vulnerabilities the Army of the Potomac would face if Confederate forces were to succeed in taking Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge. He would then delay the enemy long enough for General John F. Reynolds' 1st Corps to arrive in relief. The day would end with Buford lamenting the loss of Reynolds while experiencing relief with having achieved his objective. The second day follows with the controversy over General John B. Hood's division moving along the eastern side of the Emmitsburg Road.
I do this under protest.
The narrative then shifts to the brave stand of the 20th Maine upon Little Round Top, and then finishes with Pickett's infamous charge on the third and final day. The narrative strands are clear and succinct to follow, shifting back and forth between the leadership of the Army of Northern Virginia and specifically James Longstreet's 1st Corps and with Colonel Joshua Chamberlain's 20th Maine Regiment. I acknowledge the simplicity with merely summarising the film's various plot points, but this too often is taken for granted with storytelling. Nevertheless, it is with the nuance, the dialogue.
I'm fighting for my rats. Obviously, that's what we're fighting for.
For your what?
For our rats.
And the exchanges between characters where the narrative really sings.
That boy can sing.
Personally, the most fascinating aspect of the narrative is with highlighting how so much went wrong for Lee and his fellow generals leading the Army of Northern Virginia through this campaign. It would have proven so easy to instill one's own biased takes, to heavy-handedly harangue one individual for fault at each pivotal moment. But I applaud Maxwell for exercising so much restraint. He doesn't simply tell us what to think. He presents the scenes and allows us as the viewer to draw our own conclusions. First, there's the premature engagement brought about by Ambrose P. Hill and his division commander Henry Heath.
Things will get out of control, Mr. Heath. That is why we have orders. Is it possible you could have misunderstood them?
This scene acts as an interesting precursor for what shall follow with communication and decision-making. Whether it be where generals lack the initiative to act with autonomy and their own personal judgment,
all standing there in the dark like fat great idiots with that bloody damned hill empty.
or down to the letter within a received order.
Tell him to take that hill if practicable. The one beyond the town. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Very well.
I believe I may have been too slow today. I regret that very much. I was trying to be careful.
Communication would persist as a major issue, and for both sides. There's the scene where General Lee would openly share with General James Ewell Brown Stewart, or better known as Jeb Stuart, of his disappointment with the latter's absence at this critical juncture.
It is the opinion of some excellent officers that you have let us all down.
Despite considerable discretion in the order, and I quote, "Judge whether you can pass around their army without hindrance, doing all the damage you can." End quote. With the loss of Jackson at Chancellorsville and recognising the inexperience of his new corps commanders in Richard S. Ewell and Ambrose P. Hill, Lee would need to adopt a more hands-on style of leadership than desired. While many may point to his tactical capabilities as a military commander, Lee possessed of a remarkable strength as being a people manager, a judge of character, empowering his subordinates and getting the best out of them. But here and where Jackson and Longstreet had prior showcased the ability to take advantage of this autonomy afforded, and despite earlier eras like with Jackson at Mechanicsville during the 7 Days battles with McClellan, these new appointed corps commanders had not yet the experience, nor yet the chemistry directly working with Lee and his orders.
This was your first campaign commanding a corps. Now you know it's not always as simple as it sometimes appears.
Then there's Longstreet here, and with this scene in particular.
If I attack as ordered, I'll lose half my division.
While Longstreet would persistently act as the dissenting view to Lee's many offensive machinations, arguably rightly so, and certainly with Day 3...
But, sir, I must tell you now, I believe this attack will fail.
Why did Longstreet not here adapt? With the Emmitsburg Road, he knew more about the evolving and changing situation.
The commanding general will not allow a flanking movement around those hills. I argued it yesterday. I argued it all morning. Hell, I've been arguing against any attack at all.
You should have let me go to the right.
No matter the view taken, whether it be the corroborated accounts of Hood and to this notion of Longstreet's stubbornness and resentment for Lee during this moment, or that he had no choice and that this amounts to merely retrospective overreach, the film leaves it ambiguous, open for the viewer's own interpretation. And that's fantastic. Who doesn't wish to have a movie guide you through its narrative, doing so without preaching like an evangelist how to think or feel? While I can accept to some extent the argument there resides some subtext to the Lost Cause narrative at times, my sentiments are that this movie continues to fare well with respect to causality. It would seem that Gods and Generals had more of a retrospective backlash than much else. When we receive scenes like this that are fairly direct in their messaging,
we are an army out to set other men free. America should be free ground. All of it. Not divided by a line between slave state and free. All the way.
then accompanied by more subtle scenes like the one with the rats, where you can see the bemused members of the 20th Maine struggling to understand what this captured Confederate soldier was trying to say.
I don't know about some other folk, but I ain't fighting for no darkies one way or the other. I'm fighting for my rats. Obviously, that's what we're fighting for.
For your what?
For our rats.
That old question, states' rights to do what, lingers within the delivery. This is only reinforced by Chamberlain and his regiment encountering the runaway slave.
The thing is, you cannot judge a race. Any man who judges by the group is a peewit.
This scene also powerfully highlights, much like the possible naivety exhibited from the Confederate soldier, how these Union soldiers were now involved in the liberation of those enslaved, and where they've never before encountered an African American, to also state what should be the obvious, that the North and the South were worlds apart during the Victorian era. Causality would also cleverly resurface when those generals of Pickett's division banter before a campfire, to the lengths taken by Kemper in seeking to convince Fremantle this is not about slavery, while the others essentially respond with the equivalent of an eye roll.
Virginia, by God, sir, is going to be run by Virginians.
Oh, my. The cause.
What does Gettysburg achieve? And that gods and generals certainly did not? You guessed it, more balance. Even in the novel and in Longstreet's point of view, it states Longstreet said nothing. The war was about slavery, all right. That was not why Longstreet fought, but that was what the war was about, and there was no point in talking about it. Never had been. While one can also nitpick about the overfed soldier, or the toothless nature of a parental guidance rating, or the casting of a near 60-year-old to portray a 30-year-old, to this day the battle sequences are memorable, effective, and horrific. One only need to look at Pickett's charge, to the terrifying way in which so many marched in columns, mowed down by opposing musket fire, blown away by a barrage of artillery, to the forlorn attempt to breach the enemy lines.
As well, that war is so terrible, but we should grow too fond of it.
Lastly, there's the authenticity, the attention to detail with costumes, to the literal filming at Gettysburg National Park, and in its faithfulness attributed to the Killer Angels novel.
Same language, same culture and history, same songs, stories, legends, myths.
I struggle to think upon a more accurate cinematic offering to its source material. It nears the mark of a
word for word. Word for word.
Adaptation. Ronald F. Maxwell's Gettysburg is a unique and rather special film, as noted among my personal favourites, and while if at the booth and with casting a vote for the best Civil War film, where it'd likely go to 1989's glory, Gettysburg does make me think twice. Which film do I often wish to see again and again? And the answer would most definitively be, and every time, Ronald F. Maxwell's 1993 Gettysburg.